This is the bonus section podcast episode number 41. How often do you exercise your brain? Are you the type of person that knows you were meant for something greater in this lifetime and that somewhere inside of you there's just this bigger version trying to break free? But in spite of all your self-development attempts, you just can't seem to find the way up there? Well, then, hey, you are definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the bonus section and the host of this podcast, and a person just like you trying to learn how to live the most fulfilling life possible. Now, to help you take immediate action to get moving in a better direction, we take all the notes from each episode and we post them for a short period of time over at freethinkingtools.com. That's freethinkingtools.com. All right, let's get started. How often do you exercise your brain? So I started to think about this because as you move, and I have several brands that I work on each week, but this is purely the head stuff. And it's important to me because it's a way that over time I have disciplined myself. I mean, so many, again, having kids, there's all these diagnoses with the kid has this or the kid doesn't have that. And you go back and forth and you think about yourself. And I think about over time, and my son Jack asked me this morning, what would I do differently, or what was my weakness? And we just had this conversation going on. And I started thinking about the creative brain that I was gifted and all of the things that I see. And that might be interpreted today as attention deficit disorder as I would go off into these creative lanes. I just can come up with ideas left and right. And it's been like that in my brain. That's what my brain sounds like as a kid. I can see images and pictures. I'm extremely visual. And so it made me think that oftentimes you can't focus that energy. And so people want to dumb that down with a pill or whatever might be the case, or maybe there is some valid science behind helping somebody focus. And if they're living just a terrible quality of life and they can't get a hold of this, I get it. But it made me think about exercising the brain. And look, I am no doctor. I'm not here to give medical advice. I'm just talking always from a commonsensical, experiential way of what has worked for me. So best I can do here is share. So the first point here is the question on the table. These are questions I ask myself, so I'll share them with you. And it has to do with exercising the brain. And am I keeping up with that? Again, I'm always into physical fitness and eating. Those are obsessions that I've had for a long time. And I just have never stopped. I've developed a discipline to do those things continuously to maintain a semblance of order with my physical health. But I ask myself, number one, do you read? Now, here we are in a modern digital context, and I ask myself that on a regular basis. When I went to school, I was fully part nerd. I liked to work at school. I liked it. I would disappear into the bowels of the science library where I suppose all the nerds hung out. And I would just read. I would read my textbooks. I would get into them. And if I didn't understand something, I would read it again. And back in those days, you had a physical thesaurus where you could look up what a word meant in terms of another word that maybe you could relate to. And I would go that deep. I would go those layers into what I was learning. And I would read. And I could remember the sensation when I was, especially when I was a senior in college. It probably happened more in high school where I came to the recognition, well, gee, anybody could be smart. Just read the dang stuff. Really, that was my big epiphany, I think, when I was a sophomore in high school, that instead of struggling, all you had to do was read this stuff. All you had to do was listen to what the teacher wanted you to learn from what you were reading, and you could pretty well get an A if you just put in enough work. Maybe you needed more time than the next kid. Maybe you needed to ask the questions of the teacher a few more times, but when you read, you learned. And I can remember having the sensation of empowerment, but it was very physical. Let me just repeat that. So here we are talking about physical fitness, and I was a very good high school athlete, stayed that way in college, etc. I'm not bragging about myself. I'm talking about experientially. I'm remembering how I felt physically in an athletic way. But as I learned that the exercise of reading and going to school, I mean, a lot of people knock college these days and even high school. I don't agree. It's tremendous exercise to get the brain to understand that this power can exist forever. If you learn how to read, or you're forced to even in high school, and I don't want to do my homework, and I get it. I'm with you. Because you don't see the benefit in it from a young perspective or a young mind, especially boys that, there's a claim my mother always used to say, the frontal lobe's a little slow, right, to develop. but that reading is stimulating you to just exercise that brain, get those synapses connecting. Look, it's not a medical a leap for me to even talk about how these brains are firing these chemicals back and forth and creating these wirings. I mean, you go Google that in about 30 seconds, you'll understand that that's a scientific fact, a biological fact, that the more we're stimulating certain connections, the more they're firing chemicals, and the more they're actually building like a superhighway. So when somebody's reading, and I think Elon Musk even has a quote out there somewhere where he says, well, if you want to be great at something, just read enough books about it. And I've talked about this actually very recently in a couple of podcasts about the power of reading. Reading is not just teaching you about that specific subject. It's teaching you how to exercise your brain and how your brain is growing. So reading becomes this thing that if you can become attached to, and it's never too late to read. Maybe it's overwhelming to you when you look at a big, thick book with 600 pages, 200 pages. Just read anything to start. And if you can only get through a page a night, do it. It's like anything. It's like going to the gym for the first time and you're overweight and you look at the treadmills lined up and you begin to sweat just thinking about you having to do it. Just get on there for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 60 seconds, whatever you can do to win. And that's what reading is like. And it's a little bit tricky when it comes to the medium these days, but I will really be a proponent for a physical book somewhere in your life. Okay, physical bookstores have not completely gone out of business, and Amazon, their whole business was based on the delivery of physical books. A physical book is oftentimes, in participating in the reading of a physical book, there's something magical about that exercise. I don't know what it is, but every time I wane or go away from reading and I go get a physical book, and right before I go to bed, that's usually the best time where I'm sitting still or I'm sort of laying halfway up in bed and the light's on and everything's calmer. I don't try to, go too far in the book, and I'm always reading something that's interesting to me, and I'll get into that in a second about exercising the mind. But reading a physical book can be magical. I get it. The Kindle's a cool thing, or something like the Kindle where you can read digitally too. But I just think there's something cool and old-fashioned, and we seem to be throwing away a lot of these old-fashioned things that we haven't thought about. The reading of a physical book is a magical thing, especially if it's something that you're into the subject. You can get lost in that. And there's something exciting about physically turning those pages and getting on to the next piece of learning, especially, and again, depends on what you like to read. Whatever excites you to go from one page to the next page to the next, magical. But I don't care how you do it, read. I'll throw in that I also listen to an enormous amount of audiobooks, but those tend to be things where I'm just trying to get the gist of the story or the narrative. I'm also a very auditory reader, but I like to exercise my brain, by the way, with auditory books when I'm at the gym. You'll often see people on a treadmill or something reading a physical book. Amazing. God bless them for doing that. I just can't pull that off. Okay, so you can kill two birds with one stone by either reading when you're doing some sort of a machine work, but you're not going to do that lifting weights or doing yoga or something like that. So I just recommend reading somewhere physically. A book is a bravo way to exercise your brain. Second thing is, do you write? Do you write? And I'm not saying, do you write a book? Do you write poetry? Do you write blogs? It's not formal writing. It's just, do you write? Sitting here next to me, I have my mechanical pencil. If you're seeing this on the vlog, you can see me holding up a Bic mechanical pencil, and then a legal pad sitting right next to me. They sit right next to me because I have found that one of the most magical things to exercise my brain, and especially because I have a noisy creative one, is to get some of these thoughts out of my brain. So remember what we just did. I'm with my eyes, I'm pulling knowledge in through the reading, but with writing, I'm pulling it out of my brain through my physical arm and fingers, through the pencil, and onto paper. And there's something, here we go again with the paper, the old school. There's something magical about physically writing. And I don't know what it is, but I'll guarantee you, when it comes to writing goals or writing to-do lists on a regular basis, what the brain is doing is editing out a lot of the noise that's up there, and it's pulling through your arm. Even oftentimes you don't know this. It's the subconscious is very powerful. And so as you're thinking about something that's important to you and you write it down, there's an amazing editing that's going on. I give full credit to a lot of Brian Tracy's work about goal setting, where he talked about writing down, I believe, I hope I don't do him an injustice by saying this, but he would say, look, you write down all the things, and especially right before bed. I go back to that reading. So many things click on the subconscious, right? If you do something like reading and writing right before bed, it's amazing how the subconscious will go to work for you and find the resources you need to make these ideas or these things that you just were stimulated to perform on or be about, how quickly you become resourceful. But the writing is magical. And so when you write down on one page what's important to you today, you're going to see certain things. And by just getting some of them out, you all of a sudden find out what you thought was important in your head, by the time it hits the paper, isn't important anymore. Because one of the other things that you didn't even realize was important, there it is, and now it's screaming at you from the paper. So this highway almost, this highway of exercise, bringing in through the reading, out through the writing, sound like a breathing class all of a sudden. But maybe that's what this podcast is meant to be. In, out, and we're making those synapses and that subconscious go to work. What brilliant exercise, right? So my third point here is a question to myself. Are you educationally curious? Now, what that means is when you're reading and writing, does it stimulate you to go learn more? So you often wonder, and a lot of people get stuck. Some people get all the way up to, say, a PhD, a doctorate in something. And it's almost like as if the education ends there. I'm not saying it does for people, but the concept of formal educational degrees ends at some point in time. But really, I'm talking about the great news is that education is available and accessible to all of us, anytime, anywhere. Back in our old informal days of education, the early libraries. I mean, go read colonial history of the United States. I mean, it goes, of course, if you go to Europe, we're dwarfed by their history and how they were able to share education. That would be an interesting intellectual curiosity. Where does formal keeping of education begin? But it's amazing how the early settlers, especially the bright ones, the Ben Franklins of the world, I think he formed the first library, or was credited with being part of all that learning. And so think about that, the power of a library, the ability to share books so that you could learn. So the educationally curious would come to this informal or this early library and just get a hold of a book, the power of that. Why? Why? Because if they didn't, were they found in the streets drinking and carousing after work versus stimulating the mind to grow? So think about that, right? I mean, what's the way out, per se, from just this hard menial labor back in that day? Education. And the educational curious people, the people that kept saying, well, I don't care what I was gifted with or with. Think about all the people that were never taught to read that read because they made a decision. I just did that podcast back a couple times ago. Just decide that you're going to be educationally curious and that nobody can stop you from reading. You're going to read your way up to a bigger version of yourself, right? You're going to write your way up there, but it's because you're educationally curious. If you're wondering about for example, I was talking to my son about this too. If you're wondering about your ancestry, people like to go back in their ancestry. Oh, my grandmother came from, Italy, and my grandfather came from Ireland. And do we really ever think, well, what about way back when? Where did these people come from? I was this morning, right before this podcast, I'm watching on YouTube. I'm watching because I'm educationally curious from a book I'm reading about the Austrian-Hungarian balance of power in the 1800s to early 1900s. I was totally curious about it because when you look at a map today, it's certainly changed multiple times over there. I visited the Czech Republic with my son Marty for a hockey tournament. I didn't know anything about the Czechoslovakia and when that was formed and then when it split up. It's just so much fun. You hear it in my voice? It's just fun to figure it out because I'm curious and I don't want to be a dummy. And I don't want to speak about a place that I stood there, but sometimes that's where also traveling can really exercise your brain. So let me get into the final point here, though, without getting off too far in tangents, because I want to keep it nice and tight for you as an exercise, a way to exercise the brain. The last point is, do you block any time for this sort of mental exercise. So do you block time to read? Do you block time to write? And do you block time to pursue the educational curiosity you had? And again, I'm going to go beyond and I'll incorporate the fabulous opportunities we have now because of the digital ease of access to educational materials. So you have to be careful. There's a lot of noise and baloney out there, but there is some really good education that you can get at from the seedling of thought. In other words, what I mean is I've got my phone sitting next to me, my laptop in front of me. If I'm intellectually curious about something, it's, hey, Siri. Boom. Hit a little, right? That's how far away I am from an answer to my educational curiosity. It'll at least get the research started, and then I can cull out what I think is really what I want to learn. I can validate the source myself and determine, is this a good source, benevolent, malevolent? What is it? Boom, boom, boom. So the ability to act on your educational curiosities is instant. I was just sitting at home with my smart TV, and even though I kind of know this, I'm able to go into Facebook Watch or YouTube and just go into a more digital medium. While again, I was physically exercising the bike, I was learning about the Austro-Hungarian evolution and how all that worked while I was on the stationary bike. You see what I mean? So sometimes, again, my blocking is actually, ironically, I just told you a couple of ways I do this, but ironically, I'm listening to audiobooks while I'm physically working out, or if I'm sitting still, even a visual medium at my home. But I also am reading and writing. I keep a notebook close by the bed so that if I really wanted to write down an idea that the reading stimulated and I don't want to let it get away, I put it down on paper. So these times are blocked for me. Now, of course, I get it. We stop. I ebb and I flow. I mean, there was a point in time where I was reading some of the great Russian authors. I mean, you'd heard about all of some of these great writers, and I'd never read any of these books before. I mean, I was caught at a hockey game, a hockey practice, at Marty's hockey practice, reading War and Peace. Right? And someone came up and said, "Holy crap, what are you doing?" I was just curious, right? I mean, I had to get at it. What is much ado about all of these great writers and who are they? And again, that's just how this goes. But you have to block the time from it. And yes, you will stop doing it. And yes, you will feel the frustrations and the atrophy of the brain. You're not stimulating it. Now, I know nothing about growing old and older age. I'm middle-aged as I'm doing this podcast, but I am certain that if I don't keep doing this stuff, something's going to atrophy in my brain and I will be less than sharp as I could be. Okay? So I'm going to go back through these things. I love this podcast, by the way. This is the Passion Podcast. How often do you exercise your brain? Simply by doing these things. Do you read? That's an exercise for the brain. Do you write? Another exercise for the brain. Do you stay and are you educationally curious? Because that throws you off into all alleys and all mediums where you can exercise your brain. But more importantly than any of those, do you block any time to do these mental exercises so that you make sure your synapses are always working out and your brain stays as sharp as it possibly can? All right, let me summarize it this way. It strikes me that there's plenty of information about pushing ourselves to stay physically healthy through exercise and healthy eating. However, is there enough of a reminder, especially in a digitally distracted world, to regularly exercise our minds by reading, writing, pursuing educational curiosities, and blocking out intentional time to pursue them all? All right, now remember, you can take immediate action to get moving in a better direction because we're going to take all the notes from each episode and post them for a short period of time at freethinkingtools.com. That's freethinkingtools.com. Also, don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen, or find us on any of our social media channels under the bonus section, so that you don't miss out on any insights each time we upload an episode. We'd also appreciate it, of course, if you would share our content with other people just like you so that they get the help that they need and you join us in our mission here at the bonus section of becoming people for others. Hey, thanks for listening, and remember, I sign off the same way every time. Nobody is coming for you. So go get to work on a plan for yourself and your life, and we'll see you in the next episode to help you do just that. Thanks again.